Education Committee. Members and staff, please feel free to grab some breakfast. We appreciate you guys being here today and joining us on this rainy morning. We're going to first do we have a quorum? Okay. Our first action is we need to approve the minutes from the September 18th meeting. Need a motion to approve the minutes. Representative Clancy, thank you for the motion to approve the minutes. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All right, that is approved, and we will move.
Aye.
It's like a voice above. I like the echo. Can we take care of the echo? Do you have yours off? Okay, cool. Okay, and just for the committee to be aware, please be looking at the materials that are included in the calendar invite and online, because we do have proposed committee legislation today that I hope you had a chance to look at before you came here, but if not, please pull that up. Additionally, you should be aware that the audit subcommittee assigned our committee the audit on the Park City School District. The actual audit report does not include any recommendations to the legislature, so our committee won't be considering it today. That said, I have reviewed the report, and I would encourage you to review the report and the findings there. You have it in your email, which I'm sure is not flooded with emails right now. But be sure to find that, and if not there, you can go to lag.utahledge.gov, okay? So just so everyone in the room is aware, we're going to try and keep things moving. I know we have a lot of members of the public today. Thanks for joining us. The first thing we're going to do on the agenda is with the Utah State Board of Education. They're going to be talking about a couple of things. So we appreciate that we have Chair Moss here today and his staff. The first will be to discuss the USBE's legislative needs and priorities for our upcoming session, which is coming like a freight train, and then implementation oversight in the work group and your recommendations there. So go ahead and have a seat up here, and we'll begin. Like I said, we have Angie Stallings, Deputy Superintendent, and then our board chair, Jim Moss. If you can just state your name for the record, and we'll have staff, if you have a presentation, get that pulled up. Let me get your mic on. All right, you're good.
Good morning. Let's see. Am I live? Okay. Jim Moss, Chair, Utah State Board of Education. Great to be with you. Deputy Stallings is with us, with me, and she's going to walk through some of the policy priority requests that the board has approved. We also have a couple things still working through the system that I just wanted to point out. We have been holding some focus groups to address issues of concern and things that were disputed coming out of the last session. We've been meeting on sensitive materials, on neutrality, and on oversight generally. And so there is working its way through the system a proposed board rule on neutrality. That's not up today for recommendation because it's still in committee. We also have an oversight framework and rule that's working its way through committee that Deputy Stallings will talk about. We've been having these focus groups, and we greatly appreciate legislators who have joined us, LEA representatives and USBE members, and we look forward to having another session, another round of those meetings, and talk about some of the legislation that's on the docket and other things that are coming out of our board system. So with that, I will turn it to Deputy Stallings. I will just say in advance so that I don't have to interrupt her, the oversight framework that she'll share, which is in committee, is partly an attempt to provide some clarity and coherence to USBE oversight and also address specific concerns from legislators. We talked about a couple of questions. Where are we too loose? Where are we too tight? And how can we have some clarity, notice, and efficiency and specificity when we exercise oversight? So again, we appreciate the input there. We don't have a final rule to present, but that's working its way through, and those are things that we continue to seek input for. So those who are here today, public and otherwise, we're looking to make sure that that system is coherent and responsive. So with that, I'll turn it to Deputy Stallings. I'm happy to answer any questions about where we stand with the board process.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, committee members, Madam Chair, Senator Johnson. Before we start with the statutory requests, The chair's asked me to provide a very, very brief report on the board's motion or recommendation related to the sunset of the intensive services program. So I'll just share that very quickly. Briefly, the intensive services pilot program was a 3-year pilot to use $1 million one time over 3 years to provide funding for students with disabilities with the highest needs. That program is getting ready to sunset. The board reviewed the program, and the recommendation, this is the motion that the board approved. Special education intensive services needs are still present, but because the specific program logistics related to the intensive services pilot program are problematic, the board supports a sunset of the program. And just, there's some information that was posted related to in your last month's meeting materials that shares some of the action steps that the board will be taking. Even if the program is sunset, there will still be funding available to provide funding to LEAs who are providing services to students with higher needs. And if you have any questions, just let us know. So I'll now move to the general session request for statutory changes. These requests come to the board through a process.
Can I interrupt you just
Yes.
for a moment, Angie? Just for committee members so you're aware, and we are setting the table here. These are things that the board is looking to us, if it's possible, that we're considering potentially opening a committee bill. And so that motion would be appropriate. There's a lot of proposed changes here that may need to go in different bills, and not all would be maybe something we can just do in a committee bill. But no, as a committee, that is something as an option for a motion at the end of the presentation. Just so everyone's paying attention. Thanks,
Yes.
Angie.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So as Representative Perucci mentioned, all of these are elements that some were staff recommended or staff provided to the board for their consideration, and others are motions that came directly from board members through the board's open and public meetings. So the first item is a recommendation to amend provisions in school fees, including amendments to the definition of fee, not to include revenue raised through fundraisers. We found some difficulty treating revenue raised through fundraisers in the same way that you would treat fees that are collected related to a course or program. And Madam Chair, I'm just going to go through these, and you feel free to please stop me if
Great.
you would like me to.
Thank you.
Yeah. Second is to amend 53G 9703 to allow LEAs, primarily school districts, and school districts do allow or advertise this to charter school families and community as well, to offer the seminar for parents related to student mental health, bullying, and safety on a Saturday, or to also have the opportunity to provide those seminars virtually. Currently, the seminars can only be done Monday through Friday, and they have to be in person. The LEAs learned a lot during the pandemic. They did provide these seminars virtually as well and had high attendance. The next one, number 3, is to amend 53G 10503 to increase the driver's education reimbursement cap from $100 per student to $150, and to remove language that would prevent LEAs from using surplus funding to subsidize driver's education. There's a separate account of funds that is used to fund the cars and the salary costs of those who provide driver education instruction. That $100 amount has been the same for years. It might be 15 years or so. And due to just the increased costs in doing business, we're recommending that amount be increased from 100 to 150. There is plenty of money in that account. The account is funded through through the payments that we make when we get our driver's licenses. There's a portion of that goes to support the education of students with driver education. And that account has a lot of money in there, and moving from 100 to 150 will not have a fiscal impact. It would just continue to draw down on that existing account. The next one is to amend various provisions of code to clarify language modification related to Representative Lisenby's HB 304 from last session in regards to reintegration plan timing, as well as allowing a district superintendent or charter school to select a designee to receive reports rather than having to be the district superintendent only, and changing some reporting dates to allow for reporting to be based on the prior year data versus current data. The next one is would be a fairly simple change of changing the terminology in 53E3503 from youth in custody to youth in care. Generally now, when we talk about students who are in the care of the state, we use youth in care versus youth in custody. The next one is to amend the section of code related to the Beverly Taylor Sorensen Art Program to remove language that prohibits LEAs or requires the funding that's distributed through the BTS program to be supplantive. Next, and I believe actually yesterday, PEA, the Public Education Appropriations Subcommittee, in their motion, they also addressed that issue. So that might be something that the Public Education Appropriations Subcommittee addresses in one of the budget bills. The next one is to remove charter school authorizers from the approval process for charter schools' school land trust plans. The state charter school board, for example, which authorizes over 100, has found that that is not necessarily the best use of their time. And so the recommendation is to replace the charter school authorizer with the charter school's business administrator to be the entity that approves the charter trust land council's school land trust plan. Next, this is a refile of last year's bill. Representative Jefferson Moss may remember this, HB 306 from the 2023 session. This would amend provisions and provide an allowance for the State Board of Education to enact a rule to provide exemptions for the number of parents that are on a school community council under limited circumstances. And this would be in areas where the school district, and this is just a for example, this is not automatic. Not every school district or schools where the largest employer is the school district would automatically qualify. But for certain schools that are having a hard time getting parents to, or finding enough parents to participate on the school community council, it would allow them to seek an exemption from the State Board of Education, or from their school district, if they are in these situations where either the school district is the largest employer or where the school is serving students who are transient, and where meeting those existing code requirements would not be possible. And it's really less than 10 out of 1,100 schools that we think would be seeking this exemption. The next one is a motion was a request to amend provisions of the statewide online education program to allow the State Board of Education to make rules regarding the distribution of different fund. We have 3 different pots of funds, and maybe it's really just 2 pots of funds that's to serve students in the statewide online education programs. There's one pot of funds that supports students who are enrolled in private schools or homeschool, and another pot of funding that supports students who are in small schools, high schools or junior highs of less than 1,000 students. This last year, we had carry forward from the home and private school student funding portion, and we were able to use some of the carry forward from that to support the small public school enrollment. And we would like to have the opportunity to codify that distribution and what that would look like moving forward in board rule. Next is a recommendation there are 2 current programs that support students with disabilities who are enrolled in private schools and or homeschools, and they are the Carson Smith Scholarship Program and the Special Needs Opportunity Scholarship Program. This recommendation would combine those 2 programs and roll the Special Needs Opportunity Program, Scholarship Program, into the Carson Smith Scholarship Program. Next, in the student data privacy sections of code, we currently have 3 different policy advisory committees that to the board. Our recommendation would be to combine those 3 advisory committees into one. That's number 11. The next one is related to last session's Bill HB 348 and some of the changes that were made to allow or to codify a student's right to refrain from participation in certain aspects of school. As the board has been looking at those provisions and also the parental rights and the parental accommodation sections of the code, they are in different chapters of the code. The recommendation would be to refer to each of them to somehow make them more coherent. Oftentimes parents go to the parental rights section of code and they are not necessarily as familiar with the constitutional freedom section of the code. And so this would be not to change them substantively or to change anything as far as rights, but to make them more coherent and cohesive. Next, would be a recommendation to amend subsection 53E 4314 to eliminate a reference to the kindergarten entry and exit profile or KEEP assessment. This last year, related to Representative Spenla's kindergarten bill, the code was changed to eliminate references to the KEEP in the kindergarten sections of code to allow the state board to designate the official kindergarten assessment. Beginning with the 24-25 school year, the State Board of Education has decided to designate the benchmark assessments, the reading and the math benchmark assessments in lieu of the KEEP. The KEEP will still be optional, but it will no longer be required. Because of that, we recommend eliminating reference to the KEEP in the preschool section of the code. That's number 13. Number 14 would be to amend provisions in the code to ensure that some required legislative reports right now are required before we have current data. So for example, it might be that a report is due on September 1, but we don't have the most up-to-date data until October or November. And so the request would be to make some changes in code related to reporting dates. The next one, number 15, would be to amend provisions in the part related to school district and USDB employment, educator evaluations, to substantially remove language from statute regarding educator evaluations with the intent that the state board would then codify those in board rule. This would be very similar to what the legislature has done with licensing. There's some very general, broad provisions in code related to educator licensing, and then the vast majority of the provisions related to educator licensing are found in board rule. And then the last one is related to the next item we'll be talking about today, which is to codify a requirement that the state board establish an oversight framework. You can see the language is there. It would be a very small bill. It would just be that statement there. And we will be talking about in just a moment what we would be doing in board rule to comply with that. But this would be an opportunity for the legislature to acknowledge that the state board is creating an oversight framework and to hopefully signal their support. Last, there are 2 policy requests that are related to funding requests. These are likely things that would not come through the Education Interim Committee because they will have fiscal impact and require appropriations. But just wanted you to be aware of these 2 policy requests related to funding requests. One is about pupil transportation, which would allow, there was a change made a year or 2 ago that requires the funding to be distributed to each LEA at no more than 85%. What that did is it eliminated an incentive for school districts to be efficient. And we're recommending that language be rolled back to what it was about 2 years ago. And then the last one is to include RESA employees to be eligible for the educator salary adjustment. RESAs, that's the Regional Education Service Agencies. Just a reminder, those are the 4 RESAs that we have across the state that serve primarily smaller school districts and charter schools. And when this last session, we made changes, a large increase to the educator salary adjustment, which is fabulous. Those employees that work at the RESAs were not included, and it's created a bit of a disparity between those employees that are hired by a school district or charter school directly versus those that are employed by the RESA. And that is it, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Angie. Thank you for plowing through that and giving us time to discuss as a committee. So it looks like Senator Reeby, you had a question, your light was on.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question about item number 10 and item number 11. When we combine the Carson Smith Scholarship Program and the Special Needs Opportunity Scholarship Program, how are we going to marry those two requirements?
Yes,
Are we
so,
going to follow the special needs, or are we going to follow the Carson Smith, or are we going to blend them together?
so this motion, when it was made, the verbal discussion was about when you combine the two to have them be part of the Carson Smith Scholarship Program. So there is a difference between the two programs. The Carson Smith Scholarship Program is administered by the USBE. It probably has about 700 to 800 students that we currently serve. The Special Needs Opportunity Scholarship Program is administered by a scholarship granting organization, so we contract through an RFP with that organization. I believe there's around 150 to 200 students being served by that program. So to answer your question, short answer is it would be run by in the same manner as the Carson Smith Scholarship Program by the USB and administered by the USBE.
Thank you. That seems very efficient. That's very efficient. My second question is about the advisory boards. When I look at the advisory boards, are we talking about the Student Advisory Council, the Student Data Policy Advisory Group, and the Student Data Users Advisory Group? Are those the three we're going to collapse? And do they all have the same vision? Are there special visions for each of them? Because one says a user and one says a policy.
Right.
Can we do this without losing oversight over our data?
Our staff believes it will. So the primary, or I guess the one that has policymakers on it, including board members and legislators, usually one legislator, that one is the one we would recommend stay. It does include LEA representatives right now and local board members and others. So that would be the one that we would keep.
The Student Advisory Council or the student, which one is the one we're going to?
Not the student data, it's the policy, the one that has policy in the name.
Excellent. Thank you for clarifying those two
Yeah.
items.
Thank you. And on the Carson Smith and Special Needs Opportunity Scholarship Program, I know that's something in public at appropriations we've discussed, and the chair is here and also working on it. Another approach is that the program manager would just be the one who manages that program rather than shifting it entirely under USBE. So there is a bill file already open on this. So if we do make motions, we wouldn't need one to do that. It looks like we have some additional questions. Representative Lisenby online.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Actually, that covers it. Under the program manager, parents have a lot more flexibility, so I would support, I think there's a bill file out on that, but I would support that rather than rolling everything under Carson.
Great, thank you. It looks like we have Representative Pulsfer. You have a question? Let me see. Your light's blinking. Go ahead, try that again. Yep.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate you bringing these to us because many of these items I recognize as things that have been discussed and that LEAs and others have brought up and said, this is a problem, this is a problem. And so this is great. I really appreciate this list. I would be happy to make a motion to open a bill file or files. It looks to me like there could be more than one in with some of these items combined. So as needed, more than one that's needed. So I don't know if it's appropriate to do that right now, Madam Chair, but I'd be happy to make that motion.
Yes, we were just discussing that. I think with both of the chairs and talking with staff, it would be a motion to open bill files because a lot of these are different topics and not all of them do we want as a committee bill file, but for those that are technical changes, consensus items that both the chairs would agree on, then we could do that.
Yeah.
So that motion is in order.
Okay, and that is what I thought too.
Great.
Because some of them are kind of like, you might say no-brainers, and some of them are technical changes, and some of them are ones that we might warrant further discussion. So I would make the motion to allow the chairs to open a committee bill files to address these issues as appropriate.
Great. Excellent. Discussion to that motion? Seeing none, we'll bring that back to the sponsor of the motion.
I'll waive.
All right. All those in favor of opening additional committee bill files that the chairs will consult on and will assign out to the committee. I will also note there are 3 of our committee members who already have bills they're working through these issues on, so we'll decide what's best for the bill moving forward in conjunction with them. All those. Has their lights on? Oh, okay. No. Okay, we do have 2 online, Representative Lisenby and Representative Hall. If you can just turn your cameras on for this, and we have a quorum with the Senate. Okay. All right, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Aye. Aye.
Excellent. All right, that motion passes. Thank you, Representative Pulsfer, and thank you, Angie and Chairman Jim. Chairman Moss, I'm going to call you Chair Jim. Let's move on to the second item that you have on implementation oversight in public education.
Start sharing. If you want to go ahead, just one sec. Thank you. I'm just getting the slides up really quickly. Let's see.
While she's pulling that up, I'll just kind of remind procedurally where we stand. Staff and board members have introduced a proposed rule that's in committee, has not yet seen the full board review, so we can't present that as board action. But what Deputy Stallings is talking about here has been subject of a lot of work and discussion, including the focus groups, and we hope to have something to present as a board product in November. Our November board meeting will be prior to the next interim meeting, and so this and a couple of other issues that are relevant to this body we hope to bring before you in November in some final form.
Hey.
Deputy Stallings.
Thank you. So the last couple of years related in part to a couple of OLAG audits, one related to reporting requirements from about 2019, and there was another legislative audit related to public education governance. Our board also agreed with those audits in a need to provide more clarity on the reporting requirements, as well as the board made a motion and provided funding to meet a contract with somebody to work on a master legal requirements project. There are 3 phases to this project. Today we're going to be talking about phase 2, but phase 1 would be an opportunity to make legal requirements more accessible to LEAs as well as members of the public, policymakers, et cetera. We are going to be doing a large redesign of our website at the beginning of next year, which will change our administrative rules portion of our website to look a lot like your website does for bills. So right now, when you go during the session to look at a bill, there's a lot of great information, not just the bill language, but you might have fiscal information, sponsors, et cetera. We're planning to do the same thing with administrative rules and not just have the rule language, but have staff on there. We'll list the sections of code related to that rule. We'll list any guidance documents or training materials. It will all be available in that one spot. So that is phase 1. So today we're talking about phase 2, which is to create the oversight framework and simplify the assurances document. Part of the idea of the oversight framework would be to establish an organizational system for programs and requirements that includes USBE's current oversight role. So this oversight framework is not going to make changes to the oversight role. Those conversations will come after the framework is established, but it provides transparency on what is USBE's oversight and monitoring role. It also, because it will consist of 4 categories with increasing levels of USB oversight, it will provide a way of talking about USBE's oversight so that all people within the public education system are on the same page and understand what USBE's role is. We've found many times, and this kind of goes to why do we need it? I already mentioned the 2 audits that came from the Legislative Auditor General's office, as well as the State Board of Education back in 2021 when they reviewed their annual assurances document, which was a 25 to 27 page list of just legal requirements that LEAs had to assure to. The board recommended that we reduce that assurances document to only those things that are legally required, but instead have a tool or a way for LEAs to know what their legal requirements are. The reason that assurances document became so large is it became this checklist of things that USBE staff were like, well, we really think they need to know this. Or, you know, oftentimes it was in a program where we didn't have dedicated staff or a monitoring program, and a bill would pass, and well-intentioned, we'd add that requirement to the assurances document. But the idea is to not have that be busy work, but instead to reduce that to what is legally required. The other reason why the oversight framework is needed is oftentimes when we, USBE, is audited, it's often the case that our audit colleagues believe that USBE's monitoring and oversight should be at a much higher level than potentially the legislature intended. And often we don't have dedicated staff for something, and yet because of the state board's general control and supervision, of course, very broad constitutional authority as well as very broad authority in the code to establish minimum standards, it is no surprise that when auditors come, they assume that the state board should be monitoring everything at a very high level. And so this would be an opportunity to codify later on in board rule, not in the oversight framework, but in subsequent rules for the board to designate what category of oversight they feel matches what our oversight role is. So in general, categories 1 and 2 are kind of more on the local control side. There's no dedicated staff, no monitoring program, and generally the presumption is if we receive complaints about an LEA related to a category 1 or 2 program, those would be referred back to LEAs for resolution. And again, we will have the new rules website, which will provide legal requirements and related resources to LEAs. And so again, you can see category 1 in general, all local control, no USBE resources. Category 2 would be minor USBE resources. This is not to say that these programs are not important. It is just to designate what the USBE's role is in this program. Oftentimes, if there's less of a role at USBE, it means more of the authority and responsibility and accountability is at the LEA level.
If you can hold on a minute, we've
Yeah.
got a Christmas tree going up here. We'll start with Chair Johnson has questions, then Representative Lund, then Representative Johnson. So, Senator Johnson.
I was kind of curious on these categories. Who determines what the USBE's role? It seems like under this framework, that's put back to your discretion rather than the discretion of the legislature. And I worry a little bit about setting that precedent. I mean, you know, when citizens come forward and they say, we want this particular law, someone takes that on, right? The legislature is assuming that that law would be followed, right? And so I'm just wondering, who makes those decisions? Is it a board vote? Is it staff that makes those decisions? Is it the superintendent? And so I'm just kind of curious what you've got going forward with this.
If I could take a first stab at that, Chair Johnson. The categories and the level of oversight would be based primarily and initially on existing legislation. And so the intent there is to capture if the legislation on a particular subject has said, you will enforce this in this way and you will have staff and you will do this, then that seems to indicate it's a 3 or 4 type of approach. If the legislature has not done that, has not indicated to us that we should have staffing and enforcement oversight monitoring regimen, then it could fall in category 1 or 2. But again, the intent here is to align what we're doing with legislative intent as expressed in legislation. And I will say, and Angie, Deputy Stallings can address this in a little more technical detail, but that is most definitely the approach. And one of the important items here to point out as we've worked this through the focus groups and input from legislators is that if something is in a category 1, because we're not making regular monitoring visits, we still retain general control and supervision, and in the rule that's being discussed, we have mechanisms to ensure that if there is an issue that needs attention in those categories, USBE can and will take action. So we are looking for input as we develop this. It's going to be a multi-year process as we run through these rules if the legislature approves that process. but we are most definitely looking to implement that and then take what we have in terms of our understanding and intent to the legislature as each of these come through. And I just want to point out that there's two competing, and I alluded to this earlier, two very important interests here, I think, that the legislature wants to ensure that we have our general oversight and supervision, and if something comes up, we can take action. And second, that we ensure that we give proper notice and informal opportunities to address to our LEAs. And so this kind of goes to the too loose and too tight, and we've been working very hard to address both of those. And as this develops as kind of an iterative process, that would be the intent, is to effectuate legislative intent, but also to get that input. How can we best do this in a way that lets you know there's consequences, but has ways of reassuring and sort of informally working them out as we go? And I think Deputy Stallings is more qualified to address the technical application here, but that's our intent and our plan. I hope that addresses the question and respects the legislative role, because that's what we're trying to implement.
Chair, may I also supplement, Chair Johnson, if that's okay, or Madam Chair? The oversight framework is not meant to change anything, meaning it is meant to just make it transparent, the status quo. So if there are certain requirements in code that have directed the State Board of Education to do something, that will be reflected in the oversight framework. What is nice about this oversight framework and this tool is that if the legislature or the board sees something, say, in category 1 or 2 that they believe should be in category 3 or 4, we can have those conversations and adjust policy and or resources as necessary. So the intent is not at all for the oversight framework to change the code. It will not trump the Utah Code statutory requirements. This would be in board rule. And as you know, Utah Code supersedes board rule, but it's more of a transparency tool and a way of speaking about USBE oversight so that we're all on the same page. I can give you an example of, then well, I don't know if it would be helpful to see 3 and 4 before you do the other categories, or before you take the other questions. Just the categories 3 and 4 are generally going to be areas where there's dedicated staff. There's monitoring. The frequency and type would differ depending on category 3 or 4, and there's staff-driven corrective action. In a moment, we'll talk about something new to the rule that we're working on, which would provide more of a process for the state board itself to engage in corrective action in certain areas in all 4 of the categories. But right now, generally, corrective action only occurs in areas of category 3 and 4. And that's because in order to engage in corrective action, you have to have evidence of noncompliance. In order to have evidence of noncompliance, you have to have some sort of data collection and monitoring going on to demonstrate that there's been some sort of noncompliance. And so there you can see category 3 is less frequent monitoring, desk monitoring. Category 4 is annual or more frequent monitoring and may include on-site visits. So I just wanted to show those 3. And just so you know, the next couple of slides will also give some examples of categories. The USBE staff have taken all of the programs and done a draft categorization as we understand based on the legal requirements in Utah Code and Board Rule. And it's a fairly long list, but after this oversight framework is passed, there will be an opportunity to discuss individual programs either when we talk about rules or even through legislation. An example, of a program that moved from a Category 1 program to is now a Category 3 program was school fees. Prior to some audits in 2017, school fees were handled locally. It was a local issue, and they were a Category 1 or 2. After some significant audit findings, the state board rededicated or reallocated 2 of their internal audit staff to work on the program for 3 years full-time and use some carry-forward funds to hire a temporary time-limited employee for 3 years. So for those 3 years, it was a Category 4 program where there was very robust training, policies done, et cetera. At the end of that, we asked the legislature what they wanted the State Board of Education's monitoring and oversight role to be, and they essentially provided us with 1 ongoing FTE, and that is now a Category 3 program. That is a very simplistic way, Most of these programs are not going to be they're not going to neatly fit exactly what is in the oversight framework because all of these programs were enacted before the framework. But hopefully that gives you just an example of some programs and what categories they would fall into.
Could I add one more comment?
Yeah.
Could I think one of the institutional and conceptual points of this framework, which again is an iterative process with feedback, but there are issues on which I think the legislative intent seems to be that there will be a measure of local control. The presumption will be local control, local remedies. And one thing we've discussed is that when we outline this, assuming we go ahead with this as contemplated, would be to point out with some transparency what those local remedies are. So that would be that is our attempt to comply with what we understand to be legislative intent regarding local control, with an exception, with an opportunity there, if needed in limited circumstances, for USBA to take action, but to have it in a framework that gives some clarity and notice. And there have been questions raised about whether USBE can and should go in and address certain issues. And there's an expectation that we do have that authority. We want to just put some substance to that, some clarity and some process, so that folks are aware that we can do this, but there will be ways of understanding how and when and what notice and opportunity will be there, rather than us kind of jumping in without legislative guidance in existing code. So that's part of what we're trying to work through.
Thank you. And I think the
Yeah.
chair will have additional comments. Do you
Yeah.
want to give it now, though?
Yeah.
Okay. It looks like we have some additional questions. Representative Lund?
Thank you, Madam Chair. When you mentioned legal requirements, that piqued my interest, and forgive me if I take you clear off the path here, but it's a concern, especially in these smaller school districts, 3A, 2A, 1A. In a lot of those districts, everyone knows everybody, but they don't necessarily know everybody's legal responsibilities and legal, et cetera. So when I think of legal requirements, I'm wondering about will we be able to provide some cover for administrative people within the school district and within the schools themselves? If a father comes in but is under court order for no contact, will the schools know about that? Will they know? How will they handle that? Will these legal requirements help them figure out how to handle some of the court situations that some of these families may be under? Will these requirements give them some cover for guardian ad litems? And you see where I'm going? I'm way over my head on this, but it's a concern that I really have, because there are times that that someone will come in and say, well, I need to take so-and-so out of class. And yet they may or may not be under a court order to have contact with that child.
Yeah. Yes.
And I want to, whatever we can do to protect the administrators, the teachers, and the children is, from a legal perspective, is really important to me.
Yes. Madam Chair. So I'm going to answer this in two parts. One, to your broader question about whether this will generally provide more transparency, support, information related to legal requirements. That phase one is really more about that support and making legal requirements more accessible. Now, however, and that's generally will be the case. Specifically related to some of the issues that you just mentioned about how districts and charters support families who might have different issues of custody, that is currently what I would call a Category 1 type legal requirement, and is more governed by other areas of the code that USBE as an education, primarily that is our mission, is academics and education. We do not provide legal advice to LEAs. That is not our role. But so in that case, it is truly more, that is a local one, Category 1 type program where the requirements, it would be kind of like zoning or water usage. You know, those are things that impact schools, but they're not necessarily core education. We do provide support, meaning Something I didn't mention is that the staff at USBE and board members often get questions, especially from smaller school districts and charter schools, about legal requirements. And we will do our best to provide them kind of an objective, here's the law, here's some things you can do. We do have some staff in our at USBE who have more familiarity with issues like that and can answer questions. And just as an example, something that we often get questions about, but again, we don't have anyone monitoring this, would be like open and dual enrollment, where we have families with questions either because an LEA didn't allow their student to open enroll, meaning moving from one district to another, or dual enrollment, where we might have a family who wants to pull their student out for homeschool half the day or enroll part-time in private school and public school. We will help support and answer those questions and answer parent questions and refer that back to the LEA. And if an LEA reaches out with questions, we'll do our best to answer. But we cannot give them legal advice because we are not their counsel. But we will often talk to attorneys from different districts, or like a RISA. If there's a RISA that's supporting, we can consult with them as well on how to handle issues.
That clears up a lot. Thank you very much for that. And I understand that legal advice is something that they need to seek somewhere else. But a lot of times there's training that may or may not be available for administrators. Just to simply ask the question, is there a court order? And you know, just the simple questions that they may or may not need. But thank you for your response. Thank you.
Thank
Madam
you.
Chair.
I'm going to go to a co-chair, and then we do have other lights on. It looks like you have 6 more slides, and we have about 10 minutes left for this, and we want to have committee discussion. So we'll go to Senator Johnson, and then Representative Johnson, can you wait until she's done? Okay, and then we have a couple other questions. Go ahead.
I just wanted to ask this question because that particular slide's up there. You look at patriotic, civic, and character education. There are very well-defined standards in code that have never been implemented. And I know when that particular law was passed, I think everybody assumed that that meant that would be taught in schools, right? And so to put that at a category 1, which basically means we're going to ignore that. We'll let the LEAs deal with that. If we get any complaints, we'll come back to them. But I noticed just a year or so ago, there was a lot of discussion at the board on, for instance, action civics, which actually flew in the face of what's already in code. And so I'm very leery about setting up a framework that gives even more opportunity for stonewalling the intent of the legislature. And so I think that kind of makes a lot of the points that I have problems with these particular frameworks.
May I respond?
Yeah.
Thank you. And I understand, because something is in category 1 does not mean it's not important. We have about 1,100 schools in the state, and I don't know how many classrooms. It probably in close to the 5,000 to 10,000 classrooms. And if we were to have an USBE staff going into classrooms, that would be quite an army of people going in to check to see if classroom instruction is occurring in line of code. The reason I bring that to your attention, it's not that USBE does not have, there's no resources at all at USBE. In fact, if I move to these last 2 slides here about how we support compliance, currently when issues come up, Senator Johnson, like let's say a family reaches out and says there's something happening in ABC classroom or ABC district or charter school, that comes through. We have an audit hotline, and those are recorded. In fact, our board members can have access to what kind of complaints we're receiving. They get periodic reports, and our audit team also will send complaints directly to board members via email. What USBE staff does right now is we do handle some of those informally, meaning we may not have an active monitoring program, but we will reach out to the school district or charter school and say, we have received this complaint. Do you know, here is the law that you are required to comply with, and you need to be doing this. And I'll give you an example back here on open and dual enrollment. I had one time a parent reach out to me who happened to also be an employee at a school district, and that school district had a policy that children of employees could not participate in open enrollment. So the educator lived outside the district where she taught. She wanted her student to be able to enroll in the district. And so when we found out, she reached out to us. We reached out to the district and to the attorney and said, did you know that here's the open enrollment laws? And the district changed their policy. That happens often, so it does not mean that there's not oversight at all. It just means we don't have an active, monitoring program where we're reviewing instructional materials, we're checking classrooms, we're, doing classroom observations. That would be the difference there. One thing I wanted to share with you that this oversight framework is going to do is going to codify and provide more transparency of those expectations, because, Senator Johnson, if there is something that USBE's oversight is not sufficient or it's not at a high enough level, that could then be a conversation that the board and the legislature has to say, what does that look like? What would it take? If we gave you 1, 2, 3 FTE, what could you do in this area? And so it's not that those conversations couldn't take place. And then you can see that in general, in categories 1 or 2, staff uses informal methods to resolve issues. We do that on a regular basis. And usually that's like individual basis. Versus categories 3 and 4 is where we're monitoring the whole system. What the new process that would be in this oversight framework related to the board and engaging in some informal and then potentially more formal corrective action in all categories, 1, 2, 3, and 4, the oversight framework is providing a more process there. And essentially, part of it would be to start with the informal conversations, see if training's needed, more time. If not, then the board could direct their internal audit staff to do an investigation. Based on that investigation, they could then close it because perhaps the investigation shows that the LEA is in compliance, or potentially take other action up to corrective action or potentially removing funds. So I wanted you to know that just because something is in category 1 or 2 does not mean there's no oversight. It just means there's not necessarily an active staff monitoring program. But the State Board of Education, we are providing a clearer process and way for people to know that if there are concerns, and let's say it's just one LEA out of 160 that's having an issue. Currently, what's generally happened is, and I don't want to give examples, but you've had one district or one charter school that's been the quote-unquote bad actor, and then we changed the law for all 160 instead of taking corrective action on the one. And this now, I think, provides more of a process to hopefully take care of the one and not hold the whole system back at class from recess because of the action of one, so to speak.
And we do like recess, so.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. We do need to keep moving, and we have 6 more slides in this. And so, first off, though, we have a lot of students here. Fantastic. There are seats in the front. Feel free to just walk on through and fill in these. We also have an overflow room. I know there are individuals out in the hallway as well. In 415, you just walk. It's right here behind us. They've set it up so you can participate and watch the committee right here in 415. But try and fill in the chairs here first so that you can be in the room. 450, excuse me. It's right behind us. All right, so if you can,
I can do them very
do a
quickly.
very, very quick run through
quickly.
because we have 3 or 4 people with questions still. We need to keep moving. So go ahead and go
Yes,
through the final
yes.
6 slides.
And hopefully if I just quickly go through these, it might answer some of those questions. Just wanted to share what the framework is not. It is not necessarily the time to start moving things from category 1, 2 to 3, 4, or vice versa. It's really just to set that transparency tool, an opportunity to be able to talk on use the same language as we're discussing what USBE's oversight should be. It does not commit the legislature to anything. It's a tool to show characteristics of programs, and it would not supersede the Utah Code provisions and the expectations that the legislature has set for the USBE. It also does not define nor control an LEA-specific oversight. So how will it work? The superintendent, meaning staff, will analyze the requirements, risk, and resources related to the program. We've actually already done that, and we have a list of the hundreds of programs, and we've preliminarily put those into categories 1, 2, 3, 4. And then later on, those results would be more memorialized into board rule as applicable, if we have a board rule related to that. And again, that list, what you see there with the analyze and categorize, that would not be binding. It's not a legal binding or changing of the code. It's mostly meant to, again, just be a transparency tool and provide clarity to all in the system. I mentioned the oversight framework, how it supports compliance. In general, the current practice for staff remains the same, categories 1 and 2. Generally, staff would refer those complaints back to the LEAs and or engage in informal conversations with the LEA to help let them know about different requirements and that there might be a non-compliance there. And then 3 and 4 are the more robust corrective action. I already mentioned this new codification of a more formal process about how the board itself might engage in corrective action more informally, escalating potentially up to more formal corrective action depending on what an investigation finds. And where do we go from here? Staff, we have completed those preliminary categorizations. As I mentioned, the state board is working on R277114 and minor amendments to another rule. As Chair Moss mentioned, that went to the Law and Licensing Committee just last week and will be going to the full board in November. And also, we will be simplifying the assurances document in February to reduce that 27 page of legal requirements down to what's legally required. And then over the next 5 years, we'll continue to analyze and categorize programs with a goal of finishing by June 20th, 29. If you ask why 5 years, our board rules, our administrative rules naturally have to be reviewed every 5 years. So some programs may not need to be looked at until that 5-year time period comes up. Others will be dealt with or discussed much earlier. And that is it, Madam Chair.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we've got lots of questions and a full agenda, but we want to make sure we're going to go to Representative Karen Peterson, then Representative Dan Johnson, then Representative Pulsford, all right?
Great, thank you so much, and thanks for being here. I appreciated having seen this presentation a few times now. So here's my question, it's maybe one you've heard before, and I'm going to ask Chair Moss this question, which is, will this help, A, the board be more consistent in how they respond to complaints and things they hear in Category 1 and Category 2 things? And because I think that consistency is really important, and I think if you say, this is what how we're monitoring, and then we do have issues or complaints come through the hotline, and then we're not treating all of those in a consistent way, I'm concerned that then it decreases the legitimacy of oversight. So that's one of my concerns, right? And my second concern is, how public is the process on escalation when issues come in Category 1 and Category 2? So I'm concerned about school boundaries, which is an LEA issue. I think the LEA both has a right to know what that process is going to look like from the state board, and the public has a right to know what that process is going to look like from the state board. And so those are kind of my questions. How is the board going to take this and respond to those kinds of things we've been hearing?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I'll be quick because I think those are critical and they're still being discussed. This went through through committee. We've got a lot of input. And I think I would just say currently there is not much clarity or transparency about how the USBE might act in those areas that don't have an oversight monitoring regimen. And so when we are requested to take action, there's really nothing that has either consistency or transparency about how we might do that, other than the fact that we have general supervision and oversight. So that is a primary consideration that we're working through here, and we're getting a lot of input from LEAs. Consistency is critical because we need to know that we're not just going to swoop into town and say, hey, we're here. We need to have that, and currently we don't. So I would say this attempt is both to say, yes, we might take action, and second, just as important or more perhaps to the LEAs, this is in the circumstances and the process by which we could take action. So give some clarity to that authority generally that we hold. Second, on transparency, that is one of the things that we're working through as this rule makes its way through the committee. And I will say that the framework itself, the categorization, as Deputy Stallings indicated, will take time. That's an iterative process that tries to effectuate the existing intent of the legislature and then talks to the legislature as they try to categorize with those rule updates. But the other part, the rule that sort of defines how this is going to happen, that's what we're trying to work on, and that includes this clarity and transparency in categories, what will be categories 1 and 2, whatever goes into those categories. So we're working on fine-tuning. We're trying to make sure we have both, again, the clarity and awareness that we can take action, but transparency and notice about how we will, and make that very public. So I hope that answers the question. Both of those are really difficult questions, but I will just say that what we have now doesn't have really consistency or transparency. It's just us with general control and supervision and a concern that somebody would like us to address. So this is our effort to balance both of those interests as we move forward.
Thank you. All right, Representative Dan Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have three really quick ones. One of them, first of all, I think I heard you mention that this will minimize reports. And I'd like you to speak to that for just a minute. And also I'd like to know, is this the result of a previous audit? So, you know, that's happened. Is that sort of the causation for trying to develop this framework?
That's part of it. If I might defer to Deputy Stallings, unless you'd like me to address that. Deputy Stallings has been
Either
working
one
with
of
the
these,
audit.
fine, sure.
So partly, one of the reasons that when I contracted with our external partner on the master legal requirements list, some of what she found is that many requirements are kind of ambiguous as to who should be doing that. Is it the LEA? Is it a teacher? Is it a principal? And so we actually hadn't envisioned this oversight framework when we began that list of legal requirements. The legal requirements Phase 1, which we didn't talk about today, we're hoping is going to be a more transparent, accessible way for LEAs to know what their legal requirements are, as well as members of the community. And through that, sometimes reports that we require at USBE are actually little reminders, like, oh, by the way, remember, you need to make sure that your students are engaging in the Pledge of Allegiance daily. That is one of our assurances. It's not something we're not going out to classrooms and we're not, monitoring. And so we have put those into either assurances documents or reports. So we do believe that by providing more access to the requirements and not expecting reports to be that reminder. So an example would be school fees. Now that we actually have a school fees person, that staff person recommended that we eliminate a requirement that we've had since 1994 for all principals, school district leaders and charter leaders and chairs to fill out an annual certificate of compliance for school fees. That has been a legal requirement since the permanent injunction back in 1994. What we found is our staff said that is not helping with compliance. It's busy work. But what actually helps with compliance is having somebody who's able to train, who's able to answer questions, who does periodic monitoring and then might find something. And surprisingly, when we talk about corrective action, I think sometimes people think corrective action is it's like a big deal and we're taking money away. Currently, USBE has about 60 corrective action plans in place. And some of those might last 30 days. We find something, we say, hey, did you know you're out of compliance here? The LEA says, oh, thank you for letting me know. They make the fix to their system. Often it's very, well-intentioned. They weren't trying to be out of compliance, correct? And they're small things, and then we move on. We don't have as many that deal with repaying funds or penalties. Those are actually not as common. So hopefully that helped answer your question.
May I have a quick follow-up?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to say this. I think when you create a systematic way to look at things that you're required to look at, that is a good idea. And so I would wonder if this framework were put in place and then an audit happened again, would the findings be different than some of them that have been recently? And I would anticipate that this would be a good thing as you respond to audit requirements, let alone the legal things that are embedded in state law. So personally, I just want to say to you, I really like this idea because I think it is an attempt to really take a look at everything you're required to do and put it into something so that you're actually looking at it. I think that's pretty powerful.
Yes, and it
Thank
did answer those two audits. I apologize, I did not answer that question. It is in response to those two legislative
Yeah.
audits.
I thought so.
Thank you. Okay, Representative Pulsfer.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. There's a lot about this that I think is really going to be really useful. As I sat on the task force for reporting requirements, I began to see how the ambiguity and lack of clarity was causing some of those problems and creating additional reports in the absence of knowing what else to do. And I love that, and I love that you've put in some the corrective action specifics about things that aren't just going to the, a report, but sitting down, and there's a lot of talking to LAAs to find out what help they need. I also want to, I know I had a bill that I ran a couple of years ago, and I had an intention in my head of how I wanted that to look and what oversight I wanted USBE to have and how much local control. And it was in my head. I thought I conveyed it somewhat well in the bill, but I began to watch it play out, and it wasn't exactly like. So as a legislator is running a bill, that could that be very helpful to influence? Could what they said or their intent come to you so that we could make sure that they get where they're supposed to be by the intent?
Yes, and do you want, that is what we're hoping that this can be a common way of speaking to USBE oversight so that when legislators have new programs or even existing programs that they'd like to see changed, that we can all talk in, use terms that'll be more clear and hopefully meet the legislature's expectations once those programs or requirements pass.
Could I add one comment to that?
Quickly, yeah.
Quickly. I think, again, in those areas that might be one or two, the question is going to be, what's the legislative intent there? And so if we see it as a one or two because no monitoring or enforcement regimen or staffing has been created, we'll ask the legislature, is that what you intend, or do you want us to do more here? And if you don't, if it's still a one or two, then we don't want to just leave it entirely. And that's where I think Deputy Stallings talked about the presumption, but a possible exception, so that we can exercise general control or supervision, but we do it with clarity and notice and opportunities to address before. We do not want to be hands-off in those areas. We just want some clarity and notice there. But that will be with legislative input.
Okay, thank you. And we do have one more question. Representative Elizabeth, then we'll go to Chair Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for this presentation. We've had lots of discussions offline about this and in the working groups that you referenced earlier, and I appreciate all the work that you're engaging in. I just have a couple of comments that I want to put out there, and maybe you can consider as we have these ongoing conversations. But I think in reference to Chair Johnson's concerns, I think the general just back of mind, thought process about the way that this is being framed. If there's an FTE specifically assigned, then we will enforce, but there's general control and supervision, and you receive general funding, right? And so to simply say if we don't have a specific FTE, we can't go into schools, we can't actually enforce what is in Utah law is problematic. And so I think, too, many times, and you have a process for this in USBE, complaints come from parents, right? It's not you sending out hordes of FTEs into schools, making sure they're following curriculum requirements, but maybe a parent raises the issue or elevates the issue to the board. At the local level, there's no response, so they raise it to you. It is your job then to provide oversight, if I'm not mistaken, and how do you do that? If there's no FTE assigned and if it's not in a category 4. And maybe it's in a category 1, but there's a parent complaint. So I think those are some of the issues that maybe are swimming around and maybe are the foundation for some of the concerns we're hearing. And so I just thought I'd put it out there. No response required. I know we're out of time, but maybe that's helpful as we move forward in these discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Elizabeth. Co-Chair Johnson?
Yeah, I have some follow-up questions, but we're out of time, so I actually texted you some very detailed things about what that provides. I just want you to know, I'm very leery about your last request at the bottom where you say you want it codified to say that you should work on this framework. To me, it's almost like writing you a blank check and saying you can do whatever you want and we'll just approve it. So I think that, you know, going to the point where we're going to put something in code that basically approves of what this is, then I don't think that's going to happen, my personal opinion. But that doesn't mean you can't write a board rule, right?
Correct.
I mean, you know, if we don't like a board rule, we can always, you know, null it out through another committee. But I just want you to know that one piece of it kind of strikes me a little bit weird, you know, to say, yeah, go ahead and do this and we approve, right? I just don't think people would be comfortable with that. Thanks.
And I can see the organizationally, internally within USBE, trying to say, where do we have staff allocated? How are these programs being monitored? Where does the sole responsibility or initial responsibility lie? And I think you're hearing the feedback is, if the board moves forward with this, there are some concerns with codifying it at this point. So thank you so much. I know we're gonna be having you back next interim, and appreciate your work on this and your presentation and being able to answer our questions.
Thank
Did you want to
Chair.
say anything, Chairman Moss?
Maybe a 10-second final comment.
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
will just say that this proposed rule, for the first time, specifies how USBE can step in those areas that don't currently have monitoring and oversight. So it's actually an attempt to move into that space with some clarity rather than step back. Currently, there's nothing. And this, the other part, and I've looked at your text, so we'll take all of that and appreciate all of the input as we continue to move through that process. I will just say also that we're working on our mission and vision, incorporating the legislative audit on that subject, and look forward to bringing back our work in November on that. It was on the agenda, but it's something we're still working on. It's a small number of words with a lot of weight, and so we've had a vigorous discussion, and part of that has been to make sure we incorporate those elements of code that came out in the legislative audit. So thank you, and we look forward to coming back in November.
Thank you very much, appreciate it. All right, committee members, we're gonna move on to the next item of the agenda. Public education, parent engagement, and student absenteeism. We are running about 17 minutes behind. We're working on working with our presenters to shorten those presentations and shorten our questions, but make sure you ask them if they're important. So if we can have James Judd, principal of Timpanogos Middle School, come up, and then Eric Campbell, director of Equity and Diversity with Wasatch School District, I believe. All right, thank you for joining us this morning. If you can just state your name for the record, and I'll get your mics turned on, and we'll be ready to go.
My name is James Judd, proud principal of Timpanogos Middle School in Heber City, Utah.
Eric Campbell, I'm a director at the school district in Wasatch.
Estefania Jensen, Family and Community Engagement Coordinator at Timpanogos Middle School.
Awesome, and you guys are here today to speak on your parent liaison program and its impact on student attendance rates, correct?
Correct.
Awesome, well, go ahead.
Well, first of all, just thanks for this opportunity, and thank you for the work that this group does for public education. We're all fans of public education, and this is, as an educator who's worked with kids trying to teach them the legislative process for a few years, I'm a little nerded out by being here, so I appreciate the opportunity. So I was assigned to Timpanogos Middle School 3 years ago, 2 years ago. This is my third year. And as I came into the school, these are some of the demographics that kind of led to the beginning of a liaison program. So at Timpanogos Middle School, 20%, roughly 20% of our school is Hispanic. 16% of our school are English language learners. About 1% of our school are new to the country, which is typical with most of the schools in Wasatch County. As I looked at my individual data coming into this building, typically 5 to 8% of my students are categorized as at risk. And we define at risk as failing 3 or more classes in a term. Of that 5 to 8%, 80+% of those kids are Hispanic. And as a behavioral data, 80% of my suspensions at that school were Hispanic students. So as I was puzzling what is the obvious academic and social need of this school, it was obvious that I've got to do something to bring up the achievement and the behavior of my Hispanic students to be successful into school and eventually into Wasatch County's community. And in our parent organizations, I had 0 parents of Hispanic nature into that. So about halfway through my first year working with my school community council, I said, we've got to do something different. This is my 21st year as a building or as an administrator, and this has been a problem for that entire time. It's like, we need to do something entirely different here. And we came up with the idea we needed a parent liaison. So with our school community council, we had identified 6 areas that were typically our barriers for student success: reading, writing, number sense, English language, social and academic behaviors, and health and home. We had programs to deal with all of those except the last 2. What do we do about the ones that are having health and home issues and social and academic behaviors? And coming to this school kind of at the wake of the pandemic, the absenteeism of my Hispanic kids was significantly higher than it's ever been in my career. And so we started the liaison program, and we were able to use some mobile money with ESSER funds to get it started. And as I worked with my school community council to try and find a way to prioritize our funds and trust lands to get this. And what I have sitting next to me is Yuri Jensen, who we hired on as our parent liaison. And I will just say, this is my 28th year in education, I have not seen a single program do more impact at a local level to get absenteeism down and success up than a parent liaison. And so I'm gonna let Yuri talk just for a moment here. When I asked Yuri to come and be the liaison, the first thing I kind of said to her is, I get lots of phone calls every week from my parents who speak English. I never get any phone calls. I don't get any complaints. The only time I ever talk to a parent who speaks Spanish is when I'm dealing with a suspension, which isn't helping build that bridge with that community. And so I'll just talk about Yuri's vision that she had about getting parent volunteers first.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I would like to explain, instead of just
Can
talking
you just
about...
really quickly for the record, just state your
Yes.
name? Thank you.
Estefania Yuri Jensen.
Great, thanks, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I would like to talk about the Family and Community Engagement Program, about the process, not about a specific family or student or parent, because this will cover a little bit of everything. So there are 3 stages. First, the parents will come, they participate, they become involved, and they are engaged afterwards. So when they come to our meetings, that's the first thing we do. We invite them to our monthly meetings with the principal. They learn about the school system. They start to get a sense of how valuable education is. And then they met other parents who have been in the schools helping already. These are the Latino parent leader group. And when they listen to the activities and all the things that they do to support a student's academic success, they ask us, how can I help? So this is when parents become involved. Basically, they become volunteers in our school. And they build relationships with the staff. They work directly with teachers, so they can help not only their students, but they help many other students. And this is when the magic happens. Finally, parents become engaged in the student education, helping their own, but helping others. And some of the things they do, they also become a bridge. They are the bridge between our school community and the school, right? it's magical because the positive impact that we're having is parents will go and explain how the school system works. They tell other parents, especially isolated families, about the school's expectations. And then they go to the community and they listen to their needs and what they want to support their kids, and then we share that with the school. And after that, all these parents are recognized in events and activities that we do. Some of those is the Golden Ticket program, in which every Monday we celebrate the students. They earn a golden ticket given by the teacher if they get their grades up. And this is one of the favorite programs that the parents do at the school.
So to maybe put a little story to kind of show you how this looks on a daily basis, when Yuri, within a couple of months, Yuri had a core group of parent leaders around 10. And with our first meeting, they asked me, what is your biggest need as a principal with our kids? And one of the struggles we had been having is we had this group of kids who we kind of struggle with all day to get to class on time and be prepared. And then when school is out, we have a hard time getting them out of the building because they want to hang out all the time. And so we have this constant kind of fight, turmoil. And so the parents came back and said, we're going to be here after school. And I need to kind of paint this picture. None of this is in English. I'm sitting there, all of this is in Spanish. These parents do not speak English, and they start volunteering. And so we got them volunteer shirts, and they're there after school escorting kids to teachers' classrooms as these moms. And so I remember within about the first month, I get a text from one of my math teachers saying, so-and-so and so-and-so are down causing mischief in the math hall. I need help. So I text back, I'm on my way, and halfway down, I get this text, never mind, the moms just showed up.
That's great.
And I get a little emotional because you've got this army of moms, none of them speaking English, something I never would have perceived or thought possible in a school, getting kids to class after school to get extra help and time. And the picture that we've kind of sent around is after our first year, and I apologize, I didn't bring enough copies. I did not do my homework on the size of this, but you can shoulder Buddy up here and share that picture. But one of the pictures is the amount of parent volunteers after the first year. And that my Latino parent leaders now exceed my parent-teacher network as far as number of participants and the number of hours in volunteering in our school.
Recording in progress.
Oh,
In case you need to know, it's being recorded.
Okay.
God. I know.
Do you have something else?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, my wish is that this program is recognized by you guys as a program that is effective in intervention and how to help our ELL students and their families. I know that these parents are now working in their higher education. They do want a support, not just the schools, but the entire community, and I see this as a win-win. So thank you for your time and for your consideration.
Thank you.
And then,
go ahead.
oh, sorry, just some other kind of things just as this has gone through, and we've just done this for a year and a half. But what we're learning is the parents need as much education about how schooling works in America as the kids do. And what the liaison is doing is helping that. So the number of kids I have that are qualifying for fee waivers is up. And I look at that as a positive because that had been a barrier, but now they know there's somebody they can get a hold of to help them guide when they're having troubles. The number of kids we have meeting with our school counselors is up. Again, because parents have a trusted source of someone they can go. And of course, the big thing we are trying to solve here is this high level of absenteeism. And that is going down steadily over this year and a half as we get more and more kids engaged. And once we get them there at school on a consistent basis, we're pretty good at our job. It's just making sure that we're removing these barriers and giving the parents we've got support for you, we've got counselors, we've got mental health, we've got fee waivers, we've got food service programs, these things that they just didn't know existed as a resource to them.
Fantastic. Does that conclude your presentation? We've got a lot of questions for you up here.
Oh, sure. That's great.
Great. I just want to say thank you. I think it's fantastic in talking about how you are empowering and engaging parents and no one responds better than to their mom. So I think that's fantastic that you've unleashed the mama bear power in your school. So we're going to go to a couple of questions. Representative Lund, then we'll go to Senator Reeby, then to Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm going to try to do this without being emotional too. 20 years ago, I had the opportunity to teach in a high school, and my favorite students were the Hispanic students. And what I found out is these students, we don't understand the dynamics. Within the trailer court that they lived in, they were the interpreters. They worked all night long, and then they came to school and had a hard time staying awake during school. And these kids are incredible kids, and they make incredible citizens. And their parents are very proud of them, and they want them to do the very best they can. Now, one of these families that I had the opportunity to get close to, they now run a scholarship for Hispanic kids that graduate from high school to go to college. And I so appreciate you engaging the parents. I'm all in on this. Thanks.
Thank you, Representative Lund. Senator Reeby.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to also express my gratitude for this program. I know that it's really hard for these parents to show up at the school. It's intimidating, it's foreign, it's nothing that they know anything about, and they come here from another country sometimes, and I just really want to express my appreciation for the work that you've done and for making those connections, so thank you.
Thank you, and Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Last year,